Welcome to the Worthington Schools Facilities Master Planning Second Community Meeting presentation. Tonight's presentation will be talking about educational framework topics that will help us shape development of scenarios and options that will be created in order to come back to the community to discuss how facilities will be improved for Worthington Schools. The agenda for tonight will include a presentation, and if you participate in the meeting, we'll have individual questionnaires and small group discussion. If you are not able to attend one of the meetings, please go online and there's going to be a web link for you to participate online after you watch this video and presentation. The web link will be open until December 19th, that is a Monday, and we will close it down at 8 a.m. That way you have a couple of weekends to go through the questionnaire and discerningly go through it and make sure that you're getting the proper response that you want to contribute to this process. And in advance, we'd like to thank you for participating in the online survey, as we want as much participation across the community as we can. The process is a process that's been built upon data and community engagement. We are pretty much in the beginning of this process, even though we've already had one community meeting, but we are now starting to talk about all the educational components that help shape how we do facilities planning. Topics we'll discuss tonight will be things like grade configuration and school size, and we'll even talk about how programs help us shape facility decisions. And so, as you can see in the timeline process, what we're going to try to do is come back to you in March and let you participate in this idea of how we create options and scenarios for the district to get to final recommendations in the spring. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to establish the rules for planning. One of the things that we emphasize when we do facilities planning is that a consultant shouldn't come in and let you know exactly what you should be doing. We should be gauging community response and expectations around what the community expects to see from the educational delivery model and the facilities that we're trying to improve. Therefore, we come to the community and we ask about things like, what do you expect to see when we do facilities planning? Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to get to is this idea that it is a community-driven process, not a consultant that comes in and says, this is what you should do. The consultant is here to, and that is us, to make sure that we give you pertinent information allowing you to make decisions based on the data that we provide. Also understanding that the options and scenarios developed are a balance between the data that we collect, and that's demographic data and facility condition data, and financial data, along with that community expectation. And we try to balance that all together to come up with the best scenarios and options for you to review when we come back in the spring. Our first community meeting, we asked about perception in a lot of things, but we also asked about, what are things that the community should expect from what should they expect in a facilities master plan, and what should it address? The community came back very strongly and really talked about that this should stay within budget, that this has to address aging facilities, and it has to be contemporary to modern day education. But we also asked about challenges and the challenges that this would face. And one of the biggest challenges of the whole process was to be sure that we balance it across the entire district, that it's not necessarily the greasy wheel getting the oil for everything, but it's about everybody getting something out of a facilities plan that will improve the facilities conditions in order for their students and their staff to have a 21st century learning environment that moves Worthington Schools forward. So the presentation tonight will follow the questionnaire, and this is purposeful because we want to have people follow the questionnaire as we talk about some of the topics that are out there and go into more depth. The first question asks about acceptance of renovation versus replacement. When we're starting to talk about a facilities plan and the aging facilities that Worthington has, understanding that the average age of Worthington Schools is about 45 years old. Now, that doesn't mean schools are in bad condition. It's actually quite the opposite. The district takes great care of their schools. However, we have systems that get aged, and like roof systems and HVAC units and window systems that eventually are going to need replaced because they outlive their life. So the Ohio School Facilities Commission came in and did an assessment in the fall of 2015 to determine exactly what those needs were. And what they determined was a cost that we give a value to called a facility condition index. A facility condition index is simply this. It's a renovation versus a replacement dollar value. And when that percentage gets higher, the worse condition a facility is. Now, please keep in mind that's only the condition of the facility, not what goes on inside the building. There's a lot of great stuff happening inside the buildings. But what we want to make sure is that we're keeping up with those systems needs, that when they need replaced, they get replaced, that we're not in an emergency situation, that when they break down, we have to replace them. Now, this facility condition index percentage, the higher it gets is mentioned, but we actually use a rule in the state of Ohio called the 2/3 rule. And the 2/3 rule simply says that when the cost of renovation exceeds the cost of replacement at 66%, that a building should be a candidate for replacement. But we don't just take that on face value. We know there's a lot of different things that go into replacement of a building. These things include historic value, community sentiment, architectural significance of a building. Even site availability can go into the decision to renovate or replace a building. What we're asking in this question is what criteria should we use when determining that building out there, and it could be a number of buildings, that we either want to renovate or replace. And if we were to prioritize based on the community expectation of renovation versus replacement, you can see that there's several options out there to help prioritize when we start to make that decision. The next few questions are going to really address the idea of school size and what school size really means in the context of school planning. Now, school size is obviously one of the most hotly debated topics in the country when it comes to school facilities. What we discover in the world of planning, though, is that all kinds of school sizes work. There are obviously small school proponents out there, and there's large school proponents, but I think one of the toughest things to do is to determine what is large and what is small. And I think the conclusion we come to is that it really is district specific to the need of what the district does. Historical enrollment goes into this, and historical enrollment's important because we're going to be projecting out what the future enrollment will look like. And we take into all types of considerations when we do this, including this historic enrollment. We look at housing data, we look at transfer data, we look at all those things that determine a more accurate count for the future projection. What we have discovered is that Worthington schools are growing again. And especially at the elementary grade level in the last 5 years, where we've seen a 300 student growth at the elementary grade levels. Now, that's a significant growth in a district of this size. But what we also want to look at is how that is going through the district. And what you may notice as you look at this chart is that the kindergarten and first grade enrollment have pretty much stabilized in the last couple of years, which may mean that we've got some stabilization of enrollment going. But what we also have noticed is that when we get to the middle schools and high schools, we actually see a little tick up in enrollment into the school district, which isn't usual for all districts. Usually that's when you see students leaving public schools, is when they get into middle school or get into high schools. Worthington's opposite. They attract students into those secondary schools, which is a great reflection of secondary school education in Worthington schools. So we're going to take a look at that and make sure that we're planning for enough seats in the future when we do our facility planning. So that's one thing. The next thing we talk about in school size is that, school size is really about the program offerings that you can do. We use this example of this triangle when trying to put across the idea of the complexity of planning. Because as you go out there, this triangle that you see is that really puts into perspective why there has to be some real thought into the size of schools. As you see this triangle, you notice that you can only go and select two of these without conflicting with the other. For instance, if you want small schools with robust program offerings, it likely can't happen at a low operational cost. In turn, if you want low operational cost, it likely can't happen with robust schools and robust programs in small schools. But if you want robust programs and low operational cost, you likely can't have small schools. And so you see, you can't really work your way out of this triangle. And so we take that into consideration when we're thinking about size of school. But once again, that really doesn't give the general community member a sense of what is too big and what is too small. And I think this question really does go to the community values that you have. And so what we give you is some ranges to what you have. For instance, at the elementary school, your elementary schools range from about 366 capacity to about 698. That's quite a big range of schools. Now, what we're asking is that as you know the schools out there that you are a part of, what size is comfortable? At 700, that is typically in the state of Ohio a pretty large elementary school. However, it is a reasonable size elementary school when it comes to being able to offer the programs and the full-time equivalency of services that you want. For instance, full-time media, full-time art, full-time music, full-time administration such as guidance counselors and social workers and reading aides. When you have a more robust enrollment, that allows for more of those services to be there full-time. But as you start to get smaller, those start to get jeopardized. The state of Ohio does recommend, and they will not co-fund a school under 350 capacity because of those programmatic offerings that can be limited when it comes to building facilities. At the middle grades level, you can see that there is a relatively stable capacity. All the schools sit around 600. It's like 597 to 620. But that basically means that they're all about the same size. Now, is this large or is it small? Well, in context, once again, this might what we might consider a smaller or middle school, especially with the enrollments that are in these buildings. A couple of the enrollments are under 400 students, which makes robust middle grades programming difficult to offer. And so we typically see middle schools out there at the 600, 750, 900 range that kind of fall in, so you can get some context to where middle schools kind of fall. Especially when you're walking into high schools that you have that have 1,500 plus students, that you're going from middle schools that have 300 or 400 students into these larger facilities that have 14, 15, 1,600 students. And we might see that as a little daunting. And so one of the things we are challenged with in facilities planning is really talking about that middle grades level and how it prepares for high school. Now, at the high school level, at the capacity number that Worthington high schools are, both Thomas and Kilbourne, these are two of the, I wouldn't call them the largest, but of the largest high schools in what we'll call the 270 loop, which could include Olentangy, New Albany, Hilliard, all of those school districts out there. These would be considered big capacity schools. Now, the enrollment of these schools is about average when it comes to some of those schools. When you look at Davidson or Olentangy Liberty or even New Albany High School, the enrollments fall about the same place. But the size of the buildings actually is some of the largest in Central Ohio. Again, if that matters to Worthington, that matters to Worthington. And the community of Worthington should decide whether that's the appropriate size for those schools. And so what we're really asking about here in school size is that based on the current kind of portfolio that you have, what is your comfort? And then the question is really driving at how should we decide school size? And it goes into some questions for you that help you determine, or will help us determine, when we can, if we were to replace schools or if we were to renovate schools, to what capacity that we have some thresholds on. Part of school size also has to do with the boundaries and the enrollment. These next few slides show what we call a live-attend analysis. And what these live-attend analyses show us are where students live and where they attend schools. So they may go to one boundary and transfer into another boundary. Now, when we're looking at these numbers we don't really place a value or judgment on these numbers. What we're trying to determine is what are transfer rates and why are transfer rates happening. Because transfer rates may just occur because that's where programs are offered, or perhaps the student is going with their parent because they're a teacher to another school. Even sometimes in districts that we face around the country, you may find that a student shows up on a transfer because their address is so close to a boundary that they just assume they go to that school that's closest to them. And so what we try to do is we try to establish some means of this transfer to determine if we need to move boundaries, or if we need to change grade configurations, or if we need to look at school sizes to accommodate where students are. But ultimately what we're trying to get to here is that we determine how many kids live in a boundary. And the first baseline of planning is that we should look at the boundary and look at the school within the boundary to see if the capacity of that building meets or exceeds or doesn't reach the number of seats it needs to handle the enrollment within its boundary. Because the first expectation most people would have when they walk into a boundary or buy a house in a boundary is that their elementary school has a seat for their child. And that should be the first baseline of measurement. Now, that isn't always the case because we do have transfer rates. We do have programs that are located in different places. But this is an important tool for us to start to make some decisions on if we renovate or replace do we really have to replace that much, or can we shift boundaries, or we can make additions, or can we renovate space to accommodate more or less enrollment? And so this is why this becomes important to us. You can see that we also do the middle school attendance boundaries, and also just to kind of look to see if students are transferring across, and then we also do the high school. In Worthington, we don't see a lot of kids that transfer across boundaries when it comes to high schools. And if they do, it is typically because they're seeking a program need that maybe one of the other schools cannot offer. And that's not a negative. That is actually efficient use of buildings when we can start to offer programs across boundaries where students can place themselves in home high schools but still seek sought after and achieve sought after programs. So capacity and utilization. I think capacity, and this goes to questions number 2, 3, and 4 again, but the utilization of facilities and the capacity of buildings sometimes is a little misleading. And we created this slide because we want to help people understand that capacity really is a complex topic, and it's not as simple as just counting rooms. The for instance that we give here is that at the elementary grade level, you can see that on the upper chart on this, you can look across the district and you can see that basically the elementary schools are being used at 90% utilization, which means out of every 100 seats, there are 10 seats that are empty somewhere. Now, over the course of a district this size, that number can add up to a lot, and so you can see there's roughly 600 empty seats in the district. Now, this may seem like we have room to either adjust boundaries or we have room within buildings, but this may not be the case. And this is where sometimes data doesn't tell the entire story. An example that we give is at Bluffsview Elementary School. And this is a really good example because it shows that, first of all, students don't come in perfect batches of 28 students. How we calculate capacity in this case is that we've taken each teaching station and multiplied it by a maximum class size. And this isn't the desired class size necessarily, but the maximum class size that the school district can tolerate in a building, or that should have an expectation. And at the elementary grade level, that's 28. Obviously, we would like smaller class sizes. But what you can see in this chart is that if you look across, that students don't come in these perfect batches of 28. And so if we were not to exceed 28 in a classroom, even the numbers that are slightly above the base number, we round up. So for example, at the kindergarten classroom, we have 65 students. Well, if that's divided by 28, that's 2.3. But that means we need 3 classrooms. And so if you start to add those up, you can see that even in the utilization that we have based on number of students that says 87%, the actual classroom usage is 100%. And so the numbers can be a little deceiving in that we have seats, but those seats can be sparsely populated throughout the entire school building, but we still need that many rooms to accommodate the class sizes that are demanded by this community, and that we should see an expectation to. And so as you run this across the district, on top of the fact that there are spaces that are used for classrooms that would typically be used classrooms that we don't count towards capacity. For instance, there are 11 gifted and talented classrooms across the elementary schools. Now, these classrooms are necessary for that delivery model, but we don't give those classes capacity because they're not used full time for gifted and talented, but they are a set aside resource space for that would take away capacity of a building. So when you start to look at these kind of factors, the other thing that we really want to consider is that a district should have some room for enrollment fluctuations. At the elementary grade level, we'd like to see that 85 to 90%. As we get to secondary grade levels, we'd like to be closer to 75 or 80% because we know that scheduling factors have a huge impact when it comes to secondary schools. So you can see, for instance, that at the middle school, that the utilization is about 71%. Now, that means about 600 empty seats, but does it really mean there's 600 empty seats there? And once again, if we start to look at further questions down on this questionnaire, like grade configuration, this is something that may allow us some flexibility if we're going to consider that in the future. At the high school, it is a good utilization, and I would actually contend, especially that anything over 90% is full at the high schools. We like to see high schools in that 80 to 85% because scheduling factors and just class loads vary so much at the high school that anytime you get above 90%, most principals are going to tell you that their school is pretty full, and we would agree with that concept. So this is where we jump into grade configuration. And the question that is being asked of the community is that should we consider grade configuration changes in this facilities master plan? And I know this has been explored before, but we want to make sure we put it in the context that makes a lot of sense. That grade configuration shouldn't be explored just because of capacity needs. It should actually look at program needs and programmatic delivery models that best benefit students and staff in Worthington schools. Some benefits that we have is that, yeah, we can get some good space consideration changes in there. When we're trying to accommodate special education or related arts, such as art classes or strings classes at the elementary grade level, and they're being put into inappropriate spaces because we just don't have the room for them. Or if a space opens up, we're going to put that class in there. That is no way to do planning, and that's not fair to each of the programs. And so we want to make sure that if we're looking at grade configuration, we can benefit this. The other is the alignment of teacher certification can be a benefit, that the state of Ohio does jump around its certification for each grade level. And so if we can find teachers that are more certified to their grade levels within the grade configuration that we have, then it may benefit the district. Some of the challenges out there is that change can be difficult. Understanding that when a student is going to be at either a K2 or 3-5 school, or if an option is created for a K5 and 6-8 district, how does that impact students, siblings, when two students from the same family are going to the same school? But there's also things that are both benefits and challenges. Things we can identify are things like transportation. There could be benefits to more efficient busing at the secondary grade level. Or could it be after-school daycare? Right now, one of the schools that has their 6th grade at a middle grades facility doesn't offer the 6th grade that after-school care because it's at the elementary grade level. And so we balance those kind of things to think about, are those benefits or challenges? The other thing is capacity. And I mean by capacity is that when you're starting to look at grade configuration changes, are there ways to save in capital cost when you change grade configuration? And so we may look at, for instance, we start to ask our questions then about what is the best grade configuration. And here's the facts, is that I could probably go out and go find any research that would support any grade configuration that you can see, or you can create. And there's a lot of research that will support most of them. Grade configuration is really determined in success by operational measures in the facilities that do that, so leadership and curriculum that follow into that grade configuration and support it. The nice part about Worthington schools is that, with the exception of a need, it is generally a K6, 7, 8, 9, 12 district, which is consistent throughout the district. But what we also want to ask ourselves is what possible grade configurations can be out there. Now, I'm going to give an example here, but the example just gives you an easy example of what the change of a grade configuration means when it comes to schools. Grade configurations that you could explore are like our K8s and K2 and 3-5 centers that separate that numeracy and literacy years of kindergarten through 2nd grade into what we may be considered more the testing years of 3 through 5. Or can you go K6s and 7-12s? There's all kinds of grade configurations out there to explore. But the example I'm going to give you is a K6 to a K5. And the reason I do this is because it's an easy calculation to show you when 6th graders leave elementary schools what that means to utilization. And so we know that we have about 720 current 6th graders in the district. And so when you take 720 students out, what does that mean? Well, first of all, it frees up a bunch of space at elementary schools, which means those programs that we talked about, like special education and related arts, we could renovate buildings to better accommodate those programs because we would have space that opens up. But also remember, go back to that slide where we talked about what utilization really means, that we still have to calculate that a lot of those rooms are still being used for general classrooms. But this allows us some flexibility within those buildings to not necessarily increase square footage, but to modernize space to fit the programs needed for a full spectrum of learning in each of the school buildings. But the opposite to that is what it does to middle schools. So if 6th grade were to leave and go into middle schools, this would take the utilization from that 71% that we saw at the beginning to about 109%. And so what this does for us, if grade configuration is a possibility to explore, it allows us to create some options out there that look at, for instance, just renovation of elementary schools and replacement where it's necessary because of condition and other factors. But it also says, would it be less expensive in a capital improvement plan to just add enough middle school seats instead of touching all of the elementary schools, where we could just touch 1 or 2 or just 3 of the middle schools in order to accommodate that. Plus, it gets our enrollment up at those schools to offer more programs. So what you can see is that all these things get linked together, and that even though we're talking now to questions number 5 and 6, that it always relates back to school size, it always relates back to the program delivery models, it always relates back to whether we renovate or replace. And so all of these things get tied together, and so we never want to take them out of context of each other, because they will all have impacts on each other. The next question we ask about is high school curriculum. And high school curriculum, there are huge impacts when it comes to the delivery model on facilities. And so often things that really have the largest impacts on what we do are, first of all, how we appropriately build the right space for programs out there. You know, even Kilbourne's almost a 20-year-old school now, if you think about it. And a lot of people say that is your new building. Well, it's 20 years old already. And we know that, you know, pedagogies have changed and there are curriculum delivery models that change. Also, we know that there are program needs out there that we don't quite have the spaces that help reach the needs of those programs. And so we're going to be looking at both these schools and how those programs impact the space within to help us determine the level of renovation or even sometimes some level of replacement within the high school buildings. And this includes not just the 2 high schools, but it includes Linworth, as we talk about the program delivery model and the importance of that model in this school district. Also, efficiency of spaces. One of the questions and one of the responses to this is that, is there a possibility where we can have programs that are centrally located at one site, however, a student that can stay at their home high school but attend a program at another school? Sometimes this is caused by programs that may be under-enrolled but are critical to the district to offer, but you may not have enough at one of the buildings, enough students or enrollment at one of the buildings to support a full-time staff. So could we centralize that without jeopardizing the sense of home high school to each of the students? A huge impact is the idea of career and technology delivery models out there. As we look at your high schools and modern-day career and technology coursework, and how we're starting to bridge this idea that that college and career already feed into core curriculum courses, and they both support each other. How will this impact decisions that we make? So should we be looking at integration of more career and technology as we look at our high school facilities and across the board high school facilities? Or should we take advantage of local career centers that offer partnerships, not just at the high school level, but at the post-secondary level, that offer our students the career opportunities and the space types and the equipment and the teaching resources to allow this to happen? And so I think this is a critical juncture in a facilities plan, is trying to determine the balance between those. Because we do have spaces out there in collaboration with partners out there that will require less bricks and mortar to do. However, it will pull kids off campus and to attend these buildings. And so once again, this is very much a community response to a topic that's very important and will be more and more critical to educational delivery models in the future. We also look at College Credit Plus, because how the partnerships work and how students are starting to get more and more college credits as they're in high school. What is their access to college and career, the college courses that they can get? Do we have the right spaces? Do we have some adaptability and partners that we can use outside our high school facilities? And should we lean on those too? Again, huge drivers when it comes to determine how much space and the cost of what this facility plan can be. Let's not forget the alternative delivery models of high school either. Schools like Phoenix and Linworth are critical buildings when it comes to alternative ways that students learn. We understand in today's world of education that not every student is in the model of going to a traditional high school. And so school districts that are looking forward have the opportunity the fantastic opportunity that Worthington offers in schools like Linworth and the Phoenix, that allows students a more personalized, independent learning environment that really meets their needs outside of a traditional learning environment. And so it's going to be important when we look at this plan about how we look at those spaces and what it's going to take to make sure those spaces are as good, if not better, than all the other spaces that we have across the district. And then finally, the impact of middle school delivery. We talk about high school curriculum, but if students aren't prepared at the middle grades level to walk in the high school curriculum, then we're going to sell ourselves short. And so if we're going to be looking at some integration of some of these spaces and what they mean to high schools, we should be looking at our middle school for exploratory type spaces that allow our students some exposure to the high school and what the high schools will offer out there in the future. And finally, and then we're going to look at athletics and fine arts. Now, one of the reasons we look at these in a facilities plan is that if the plan was to be co-funded, it's going to be that a lot of the spaces that we look at don't get co-funded when it comes to athletics and fine arts. And so when we're doing facility planning, we should have some expectations about how much they should be included. Now, my time I spent in Worthington is that all these programs and like athletics and fine arts are important to the overall curriculum and what brings and keeps students and families in Worthington schools. And so we believe these are important components. But the things that we should be looking at, and the purpose of doing this, is to really formulate some of those options and scenarios that we have out there. Are there opportunities for efficiencies, or are there opportunities for equity where they don't currently exist? And we need to look at all those to make sure, and we're asking you about some of those things when we're asking about athletics and fine arts. The final topic in your questionnaire is around community use. And should our schools be community centers? Well, the general answer and the consensus that I get around town is yes, they should be used as community centers. But when schools get used by community, there are challenges out there that we must face in facilities planning. First and foremost is safety and security, making sure that if the community is going to use our buildings in the school district, and they should be using the schools, how do we make sure that they are safe and secure? The next thing that we always look at is operational cost. Lights don't come on for free. And so how do you balance that with the user groups that you'd like to see and you welcome into your schools? But also that comes with the operational component of this. Time and usage, custodial fees, energy fees, all those kind of things that go into the operation of these facilities. And finally, just the management. You've likely been on the school district website and you've seen how booked gymnasiums are, auditoriums are, spaces are used throughout the district. And this is good because we see that there is a shared unit of collaboration when it comes to using facilities. And we want to see this continue. But when we're starting to look at that, we'd like to see if there are groups out there that should be more included in when we talk about community use. Or if you see something that's not on the list, please list that for us. And so you'll notice that when we talk through this presentation tonight that we didn't talk much about facilities. We really talked about the framework that helps build our facilities and the plans and options that we can develop to help you get to how we make facilities decisions. And that's purposeful. As we get to the next rounds of meetings with the community, all that information will be pertinent because it will be building specific and action specific to buildings. But we need these rules from the community to help us establish those scenarios and options. And once we have those rules, we live inside those rules. So when we develop an option or scenario, we go back to the community checklist and we say, does it fit within the parameters that we talked about in that second community meeting? And so, once again, we have an individual questionnaire for you to fill out. And you can see that on the bottom of the website, on the bottom of this page, is the website you can link to. And that'll have a presentation link also to it that you can watch this presentation online or the PowerPoint, and then you can answer your questions. Again, it will be open until December 19th, and that's a Monday morning at 8 o'clock to give you a couple weekends to go to this. And please tell your friends and family to go onto the website. And if they want to watch this video or even just watch the presentation or watch the slideshow to inform them about how to answer questions, that would be great. So any questions that you might have, please email the district and they will get those emails to me. We look forward to your participation in this, and we certainly look forward to seeing you in March when we get to options and scenarios. Thank you.